Let's rev it up. I love it.
Look at the football just
Coming
shreds.
soon, NFL football. 32
just
teams,
shreds.
32 shows, primetime action.
You don't have an animation that just takes the 32 and just goes whammy 31.
Oh, you know what it should do? It should rip the 32 should also rip like the football does.
Well, that is way too complicated complicated
and
technology
turn into a
for us.
question mark is what it should do. So like the 32 should just like go up and kind of flames like the football does, and then it turns into a question mark.
Yeah. I was thinking you wanted a counter every time.
Who's got to do that?
We
Roberto
double
Moreno?
up on shows.
Who's got to do that? Roberto Moreno?
Yeah.
All right, I'll text.
Yeah, peer pressure.
Yeah, I got to be
Get
like, all right.
Rob Moreno
We're all about
like
bullying
Roberto
on this show.
on the line.
Me and Roberto go way back. He'll do that for me.
Yeah,
We'll
bully him into it. We'll be good.
We'll consider for next year, for 2023.
No.
32 teams.
No, that's next show.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. Well, I guess we'll do that tomorrow. Well, we're talking Bengals, who win the AFC a season ago. And it's interesting how it seems like we've had this conversation just about every year over the past decade, that Super Bowl loser, and it becomes the most kind of lazy, tired narrative of the team who then fails to make the playoffs or mightily disappoints the following year. Only it is certainly a case-by-case basis, and we saw the Chiefs certainly still had a very, very good football team last year after losing the previous year's Super Bowl to Tampa Bay. The general question now as we take a look at the Bengals recap from 2021 is what should the realistic expectations be for this team, given that they have one of the best quarterbacks in the game back, a bunch of really good offensive weapons, and they did a number of things on the ball defensively, and that's kind of what we'll dive into here.
Zach Taylor continues on, head coach here. Brian Callahan, offensive coordinator. That stays intact. So, again, one of the better offenses, despite the fact they had one of the worst offensive lines in recent memory, should be pretty appealing here for the prospects of this team from an offensive standpoint. Now, listen, we'll get into why maybe there's some knocks for sure. But if you take a look at what they did in the offseason, this is why I think this is a little bit different than some of these teams where we say, oh, okay, big step back here, they overperform, whatever. Like, okay, if you want to tell me that Cincinnati definitely overperformed last year, fine, I will buy into that. I will say, okay, maybe they did. What they did was go out and sign offensive guard Alex Kappa. They got right tackle Lyle Collins. They got center Ted Karras. So, like, they go out and they redo an offensive line where I'm sitting here and the major malfunction of this team was the fact that Joe Burrow was getting destroyed half the time that he dropped back, and he didn't have the time that he needed to properly throw the ball down the field, despite the fact that him and Jamar Chase still had an awesome chemistry down the field as well. Now you get 3 offensive linemen in that are all very solid, proven starters in the NFL. So now they come in. They also signed tight end Hayden Hurst because CJ Uzomah is out of town. Larry Ogunjobi also out of town for them. Darius Phillips also out of town for them. What they did, though, with Darius Phillips leaving, they go in, they draft two defensive backs in the draft. First round pick, Daxton Hill. They take another safety in the second round in Cam Taylor-Britt. Then a defensive tackle in the third round. So you see so in free agency, they go and rebuild the offensive line. Then on the defensive side, that's where they build through the draft. They get a couple of safeties, defensive backs in the first 2 rounds, defensive tackle in the third round. Then they come back with just some depth on that offensive line with an offensive tackle and Cordell Volson in the 4th round. So I think they masterfully took care of the offseason. I mean, with what they did in free agency, what they did in the draft, I think could not have been any better for this Cincinnati team. If we look at what they did last year, 17th overall DVOA in 2021. That meant they were the 18th offense and the 19th defense, but their special teams actually really did propel them 8th overall. You remember, really good kicking game for this Bengals squad, and that should continue again in 2022. The big thing here for this team heading into the season is just the schedule. They have the 7th toughest schedule in all of the NFL, and with that, it really gets tough on the back end. If you take a look at weeks 13 to 18, this is going to be a really tough stretch, and it doesn't even matter how good this team is. I mean, this team could be really good, Ben. They could be awesome. But when you go Chiefs, Browns, Bucks, Patriots, Bills, Ravens, and the reason I bring the Browns into play is because by then they might have Deshaun Watson back. you're just going to lose games. Like you're just going to lose games down the stretch
brutal.
here. So
Wow.
if they have not secured, I'm not going to say, I mean, they won't have it secured, but if they have not put themselves in a really good position to make the playoffs, they could certainly find themselves having to scratch and claw in that last little stretch to make the playoffs. So it is going to be very interesting to see how they handle this first half of the schedule where they do have some very winnable games. Steelers, Jets, Dolphins, Saints, Falcons. You get the Browns earlier on in the season where you're likely to be without Deshaun Watson. You get the Panthers as well. All that is front-loaded, right? All that's front-loaded. You go on bye, then you come out of the bye and you get the Steelers. I think the Titans are going to be much worse this year. So through week 12, they are going to have to put themselves in a position to make the playoffs, because if they have to make the playoffs in that 13 to 18 week stretch, I think it could be really, really tough on this
So
team.
how do we think they fit into what is a very jam-packed AFC North? We'll look at the odds for that, season win totals, divisional odds, championship odds, everything else. That's next. We talk more Cincinnati Bengals. We just went over, Matt, the very difficult back end of the schedule for Cincinnati. Talked about some of the offseason additions. And again, the kind of theme here is when you look at a team that was, as you mentioned, pretty much middle in the pack in the advanced metrics with Football Outsiders and their DVOA. We talk about all the offseason additions, but the question also becomes on the defensive side. How reliable will this unit be amidst what is perceived to be an extremely competitive AFC North division this year?
And because of that tough schedule, Warren Sharp pretty much has them projected right on their season win total. He has them at 9.6 wins. It's sitting at 10 right now. So it's kind of right on. Seems like it's unbettable from that aspect. ESPN has them as the 8th most talented roster heading into 2022. And we go and we take a look. And Pro Football Focus, which does their unit rankings and basically breaks down every single facet of the game and where they rank compared to their peers. 8th rated offensive line headed into 2022. So you're talking about one of the worst offensive lines there was in the league, and now you're talking about a legitimately 8th rated offensive line heading into 2022 according to Pro Football Focus, because you have Jonah Williams over at left tackle, you've got you got Ted Karras there at center, Alex Kappa at right guard, and Lyle Collins at right tackle. That is 4 of the 5 spots that are really, really strong. Now, Jackson Carman was a rookie last year, didn't grade out so well, but typically it's year 2, year 3 that these offensive linemen tend to make big steps in the NFL, so they're counting on him to make a big step there at that left guard position. But this offensive line should be exponentially better so long as health doesn't become a problem for them. 14th rated defensive line as we head into the year as well. Trey Hendrickson, a absolute stud. People were wondering if that acquisition, whenever he left the Saints, was really going to pay off. Maybe they thought that he wasn't quite as good. All he did was get 75 quarterback pressures in 2021. That was top 5 in all of the NFL. He proved to be one of those guys that can go in there and really cause some havoc for them. This is the number 1 rated wide receiver group in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus. And all you have to do is read the names off, and it makes perfect sense. When you have Jamar Chase and you have T. Higgins and you have Tyler Boyd, you're looking at a 1, 2, 3 right there. That if Higgins was on, let's call it 12 other teams, he'd probably be their 1. If Boyd was on 20 other teams, he would be their number 2. So you're getting guys here where Higgins can be a 2 and be basically one of the very best 2s there is in all the NFL, and then Boyd can be the a 3 and be the best 3 that you're going to find in the NFL. So this core is so incredibly good, and again, barring injury, should be the number 1 rated group in all the NFL. And then the secondary actually is another part that in a division that we expect to be so incredibly competitive, Ben, you look at this, and I mean, where they sit right now, if you went with just the starters that are projected to be there before they even had a draft pick, right? Chidobe Awuzie, Eli Apple, Mike Hilton, Jesse Bates, Von Bell, that comes out, according to Pro Football Focus, as the 10th best secondary heading into 2022, and that's not even projecting that Daxton Hill, their number 1 pick in the draft, is going to slot in, and he very well might beat Eli Apple out. out, right? I mean, like Eli Apple has certainly been spotty.
That's certainly
at
the
best.
rumblings
Yeah.
we're hearing is that is a legit battle in training.
Yeah,
camp, or
like
it
I
will
mean,
be.
he's been spotty at best over the course of his career,
Yeah.
right? Like Eli Apple, couple of games a year will make you be like, oh, this guy's really, really good, and then whatever, and then Cam Taylor-Britt, the guy they took in the second round, is certainly going to factor in somewhere. Now that might just be at depth and being able to come in and spot some of these guys here and there, but maybe he ends up winning a job in training camp as well. So that is really, really interesting from a defensive side of the ball for this team, because you're talking about an upper half defensive line. You're talking about an upper third secondary to go along with an offense that we think is probably going to be one of the top 7-8 offenses in all of the league. And so the problem is, and you're saying, well, how is this team not, have an 11 win or 12 win or whatever? And it all goes back to that schedule, right? I mean, you go in and you look, and one of those teams on the back end is going to disappoint. Like that just,
Right.
every year we always think like, oh, this team XYZ is going to be so awesome, and then they're not. But it's still going to be very, very tough on that back end, which is why I think that win total for me is just is too hard to take a position on one way or another. I mean, if you try to pull out a weakness on this team, it's kind of hard. I mean, maybe you could look at that left guard position, and maybe Jackson Carman doesn't take that second year leap, and he is kind of the weak link in that offensive line. And we've seen some really good offensive lines that have still struggled at times because there is a weak link in there. Who knows? Maybe he ends up getting. Maybe the guy they took in the fourth round, right? The Cordell Volson kid ends up having to play some time there at the left guard position. But outside of that, it's very tough to find a weakness on this team that really stands out. There are a lot of strengths. So you mentioned the quarterback position, the wide receiving core, the majority of the offensive line, certainly the secondary, you could say as well, is a strength as well. So I think 10 is fair. Would it surprise me if this team won 12 games? It would not. Would it surprise me if this team won 9 games? It would not either, because you get to that second half, you get to the last part of that schedule, and Chiefs, Browns, Bucks, Pats, Bills, Ravens, they're likely to be either very, very slight favorites or very, very or very slight dogs in every single one of those games. Like, there's not any of those that are going to be slam dunks, I don't think, anywhere along the way, unless the Pats really, really disappoint, which I don't think that'll be the case either. So tough for me, tough team for me this year. I was all over them last year. It's just a tough team for me to bet this year. I think I'll be a wait and see, sit back. But the thing is if you're bullish on them, you have to bet them preseason, because
there's no slow start.
There's no slow start. Like, you have to bet them preseason. If you're bullish on this team, this isn't one of those teams where we say like, oh, sit back and wait until week 3 or 4 or whatever. Like, no, the easy parts at the beginning, hard parts at the end. You're going to get a way, way, way worse number if you wait to bet them in the first half of the season, and so you got to bet them now. If you're bullish on this team, you got to bet them now.
Zach Taylor, you're sold as a head coach, like in general at this point.
I mean, look, he made some decisions, I think, over the course of the last couple of years where a lot of us have kind of questioned, some of the in-game management stuff or whatever. But listen, young guy, young coach, not a ton of experience. I think definitely willing to, and this is just me trying to perceive what he's off the field, but I mean, he seems like a dude who goes in, studies, tries to learn from his mistakes, and he doesn't seem like a know-it-all, I'll put it that way, right? Like, he seems like a guy that is okay with trying to absorb some of the criticisms that have come his way, and certainly a guy that is open to all facets of how you go about prepping for a game. While he's not completely all analytics, he's not analytics, he's not anti-analytics either, right? And we can continue to see some of these coaches do this. This GM for the Titans, did you see this? Like, the GM for the Titans come out and say, like, when we evaluate a player, we just put on some tape and watch him play. We don't, the numbers don't tell, whatever else story. It's like,
great
yeah,
evaluation.
I mean, yeah, man, of course you're going to watch. But I mean, like, to sit there and say that the advanced analytics don't play. I mean, like, get out of here. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's going to be a pass on Cincinnati for me this year, and a team that I had so much riding on last year. It's just too hard for me to try to predict. I'd much rather this schedule be flipped, and in that way, I would be able to see how they made it out of that first half, and then be able to come in and make a decision mid-season and go from there. The fact that it's set up this way makes it very, very hard for me to be able to back them here. That being said, if you look at what should happen by the time they hit week 13, they're going to lose a game that they probably shouldn't lose, but they are going to be favored, probably, most likely, in every game except one. I think maybe they are. I think maybe they're a dog at the Cowboys there in week 2 by the time it's all said and done. But and maybe like a pick 'em with the Ravens, maybe the 1-point dog or something like that at the Ravens or something in week 5. But I mean, they're likely to be favored in pretty much all those games until they get to week 13. So they're just going to win the games that they're supposed to win.
Yeah, I'm with you. Maybe those two, but yeah, you're right. Otherwise, through week 12 of the season, yeah, it should be favorites in mostly all of those.
And if the Titans certainly disappoint like we think they are, they might be big. You know, they might be 3-4 point favorites over the Titans by the time it's all said. By the time it's all said and done, even on the road by week 12, I think the Titans are going to be weighted. I think the Titans are going to be down this year. So that wouldn't surprise me in the least bit. So they got to just go win the games they're supposed to win and hope that they can come out of that stretch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that 6-game stretch there at the end. You gotta, if you come out 3-3 and you've done what you're supposed to in the first half, then they'll make the playoffs.
It's kind of why, in general, we're seeing this division very, very bunched up, and that's partially because we don't know what will happen with Deshaun Watson, but it's also because there are 3 teams that grade out pretty well. And you also, you can never discount the Steelers, even though we're not, thinking they will be at that very level, but you still can't discount them out either.